Bruce here, and today we're going to cover Joshua. Joshua is one of those books that covers quite a bit on leadership, so for you leaders out there, this is a great book to dig a little bit deeper into. Joshua was written by Joshua, and the purpose of Joshua was to give a history of Israel's conquest as they transitioned to the Promised Land. And it's kind of broken into three major segments. The first one talks about the entrance into the Promised Land in chapters 1 through 5. And it's in this one that Joshua really demonstrates his faith in God as he takes on the challenge to lead the nation. If you recall, the Israelites reaffirmed their commitment to God by, obediently setting out across the Jordan River to possess the land. And we can kind of draw a correlation there in our own life that as we live a Christian life, we need to cross over from old and past to new, put off our own selfish desires and press on to really possess all that God has planned for us. It's a lot like Joshua and Israel that we need courageous faith to live a new and different life and a more powerful life. And, the next section of the book really talks about conquering the Promised Land. And Joshua and his army moved from city to city in this book, and they cleansed the land of the wickedness by destroying every trace of idol worship, which was a big problem back then. And conflict with evil is inevitable. We're going to face it, as we should. We need to be merciless as Israel was in destroying sin in our own lives. And finally, the last section talks about the dividing up of the Promised Land once they get there. And this is in chapters 13 through 24. Now Joshua urged the Israelites to continue to follow the Lord and worship him alone. The people get in the land, and they had seen God deliver them from, all of these different enemies and miraculously provide for all their needs. But when they get there, they're prone to wander from the Lord. And even though we may have experienced God in a powerful way in our own lives, we too must continually think about and renew our commitment to obey him above all other authority and to worship him alone. So as we get into Joshua, if you recall, Joshua took over after Moses had passed away. And at one point in the book, one of the more famous stories there is found in chapter 3, verses 12 through 17. The Jordan River actually becomes dry and allows all the Hebrews to cross over it. And then there's the story of Jericho, which is found in Joshua 6. Now, God had instructed the Hebrew army to walk around the walled city once a day for 6 days with 7 priests walking ahead of the ark. And then on the 7th day, they were to walk around the city for 7 times with the priests. They were blowing on ram's horn trumpets. So they were trumpets made out of ram's horns. Finally giving one loud blast, and all the people shouted at the same time. When that happened, the walls of Jericho crumble, and Jericho was defeated. Now, the taking of the Promised Land by fighting the occupants in the Promised Land was also described. And in Joshua 10, verses 13 and 14, the sun and moon actually stop for a day, and Joshua, at age 110, passes away. And, another story that we heard about in Exodus, where the bones of Joseph were being carried around, they're finally laid to rest in Joshua 24, verse 32. You can read about that. So in summary, as we look at the book of Joshua, there are several major lessons. We'll start with success. Now, God gave success to the Israelites when they obeyed his master plan, not when they followed their own desires. So victory came when they trusted in him rather than trusting in their own military power, money, muscle, or mental capacity. There's a lesson in that, which is that God's work is done in God's way, and it will bring success. The gold standard for success, however, is not to be set by society or the people around us, but actually by God's word. And we must adjust our minds to God's way of thinking in order to see his standard for our success. When it comes to faith, the Israelites did demonstrate faith by trusting God daily to save and guide them. They noticed how God fulfilled his promises in the past, And they started to develop a strong confidence that would be build on their faith and their personal trust in him for the future. And the importance of that is our strength to do God's work comes from trusting him and him alone. His promises reassure us that his love is there and that it will be there to guide us in the decisions and struggles that we face. Faith begins believing. It begins with believing that he can be trusted. So as we look at guidance, the third summary point in Joshua, God gave instructions to the Israelites for every aspect of their lives. His law told them how to live daily and gave specific marching orders for how they can be victorious in battle. And guidance from God for daily living can be found in his word. By staying in touch with God and staying in his word, we have the needed wisdom to meet the great challenges of life. And I talked about this being a great book of leadership. Joshua, a very, very good leader, and nice to draw correlations of his leadership to leadership today. Joshua was confident in God's strength. He was courageous in the face of opposition. He was willing to seek God's advice. And to be a strong leader like Joshua, we have to be ready to listen and move quickly when God instructs us to. Once we have his instructions, we have to be diligent in carrying out what he says. Strong leaders are led by God. And finally, conquest. God told his people to conquer the Canaanites and take all their land. Completing this mission would have fulfilled God's promise to Abraham and brought judgment on the evil people living there. But unfortunately, Israel never finished the job. And the importance of that and the lesson in that is that the Israelites were faithful in accomplishing their mission at first, but over time their commitment faltered. To love God means more than being enthusiastic about him. We must complete all the work that he gives us and apply his instructions to every corner of our lives. And that's Joshua in 10 minutes or less.